for the conference. Jo Potts joining us. So Joanne Potts is an ecological statistician based in southern Tasmania, is the director of the Analytical Edge, a statistical consulting firm she has led since 2012. An accredited statistician with the Statistical Society of Australia, Joanne brings a wealth of expertise in survey design and data analysis across a broad spectrum of applications. Her main areas of expertise are estimating abundance, invasive, rare and commercially harvested species, developing species distribution and demographic models, especially under climate change, and creating models of pest and disease spread to assess biosecurity risks. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Melbourne and a PhD in Applied Statistics from the University of St Andrews, Scotland. She's here today to talk about her experiences in statistical consulting. So I'll hand you over to Jo now.
Thanks, Melissa, for the intro, and then also to the Stats Society and the Early Careers, is it a branch or group, for hosting and the invitation to talk to you guys about my experience as a statistician. I find the day started with Russell, and I think he gave a great overview of working as a consultant. The diversity of where this sort of the interface sits. I found it a little bit amusing. I did miss the first 2 days of this conference. I apologise because I was at Pearl Jam, and it was amusing for me to find out that you peak your musical interest at 15, so you could pretty much age me by that graph, and when some key Pearl Jam albums got released. Even with the diversity of talks that I've seen today, I always love attending stats conferences. I always learn stuff. And already, things like bridging the gap and the bushfire talk we did earlier, speaking about being the only biostatistician inside a group, these are all concepts that are common to all of us. So coming together and talking about this stuff, I feel, is a bit like therapy. And shifting slides, is it arrows? Oh, spacebar. Okay, so how this all began. We moved as a family to Truida, Tasmania in 2012, and initially at the time I was working as a postdoc remotely at Melbourne University. Tasmania is sort of a funny place. Local employment market, I'd say, is still sort of reasonably limited. I know we've got CSIRO here, and we've got IMAS, and we've got the uni, and we've got the hospital, but it's actually quite a relatively small city. You're not somewhere like Melbourne, there's 5 million people and lots of companies to work with. So I was applying for a local job for the Department of whatever they were called at the time, Primary Industries. It was a biosecurity position, and I was really excited. It was right up my alley, having just finished postdocs at Melbourne Uni in biosecurity and disease modelling. And a guy at UTAS actually contacted me. He was on the interview panel, very excited that someone with my skills had moved to Hobart. And do you want to do this casual job for me? And I was like kind of offended. I'm like, I want the job that I applied for. And on the phone, the guy, I just had these words torrenting out of my mouth saying, well, if you want to get me as a casual, then you can do it through my company. And I never normally so brazen, I don't feel anyway, to be honest. And he said yes. And so then I had, startup money for insurance, a website, setting a company, and 24 hours to do it, because of course I had no company at that point. I was under what felt like a little bit of pressure. But of course, it didn't actually start in 2012, did it? I went to university knowing that I wanted to do something broadly environmental. Australia, and I don't know what it's like in New Zealand for those online and people that have studied overseas earlier in their lives, but the high school education system here I find is very streamed. clearly aptitude, or some level of aptitude anyway, towards being maths science student, and was always heavily streamed in that area. Touching on the talk earlier, I do have a father who's a physicist, so that probably helped influence my own mathematical language growing up. It only seems natural for someone who's deeply passionate about conservation to be doing 2 maths, physics and chemistry at university. Don't know how that actually happened. And by second year, I had done so much maths and stats that I actually couldn't change into doing a conservation major for my science degree. So I did actually feel a bit lost, to be honest, and that's how I call what I got my accidental stats degree. I didn't really have a lot of passion for this area, and I didn't really know what the heck I was going to do with it, because all I wanted to do was go and save some animals. But I met a guy, some of you might know them, Mark Bergman, and my honest response was, I want your job. He is now an academic over at the University of Hawaii, but at the time was running a risk, what was it called? The Centre for Environmental Risk Analysis at Melbourne University. And I got exposed to this amazing use of statistics inside an environmental science ecological setting. And it's been wonderful meeting Mark, and then consequently many other mentors in my life that really helped guide me into this area of statistics that I find amazing and really exciting. So from graduating my science degree, those in Victoria and elsewhere might have heard of the Arthur Rylah Institute. I think it's Australia's only government institute that's focused on biodiversity research, specifically in a government setting. I was like, how old was I? 23 maybe? I was so alone. I was the only statistician, not only at the Arthur Rylah Institute, but the entire Department of Sustainability and Environment. They had never hired a statistician before. I was overworked, completely overwhelmed, and I absolutely loved it. I had found my people, and I'm like, this is absolutely where I want to be in my life. From there, I actually moved over to St Andrews, the Centre for Environmental in Research and Ecological Modelling. And I never went to uni thinking I'd do a PhD, but here I was moving to Cream in 2006 with a 20-kilo backpack, and then moving back to Australia in 2011 with a husband, a small child, and pregnant. So a lot of life happened to me during my PhD, and you know, if you sat in on the mentoring panel at lunchtime, these are the kinds of topics that I talk about with mentees. You are starting PhDs, and no one actually has 3 or 4 years of their life where everything goes smoothly. So just keep that in perspective when you're doing these long-term projects. Of course, I started postdocs at Melbourne University, moved to Tassie, and then Analytical Edge was started. And you know, the romantic version of events is that this company bloomed, and the reality is it's, of course, been a total roller coaster. The person that spoke before me said they were lamenting the fact of being the last talk during an admittedly contributed sessions. I actually kind of like presenting last, because I just get to chat to people. So you get to strap in for the ride for the rest of this afternoon and come along with me. I think that I really do have the best job, and everyone here is statisticians. You're working in a wonderful place. The company's remit, and then also all of us in this room, is really to help people do better science. And that's something that I'm firmly committed to, and help people make better decisions. There is huge demand for this in all areas of government, in all levels of government, private industry, universities, students here, postdocs, NGOs, hospitals, doctors. Everyone needs to really help their patients. They're, you know, giving advice, making good decisions. but they themselves might need help doing this. I find it very, very rewarding. I've done some crazy stuff as a statistician. I got invited out to Barrow Island, so people online in the Perth hub. I tend to wave my arms around so much when I talk, I get so excited. Sorry, I bumped the microphone. Barrow Island is a Class A nature reserve off the coast of central WA, and you really can't go there without a field permit, or unless, of course, you want to actually extract all the minerals that are underneath WA, but we'll leave that part aside. The burrowing bettong is listed as vulnerable, and the island is actually surrounded by large oil and gas reserves. So I got invited out there to review capture recapture of the burrowing bettong, and I had a blast. It was fantastic. I'm heavily WA focused in some of these case studies. Some possums. The western ringtail possum is critically endangered. Prior to data collection, which I might add is a complete and utter miracle, I was involved in survey design. So other people touched today on the fact that we're trying to often resurrect people's data, but this is a great example of being involved straight from the beginning. These guys put in a huge effort. They walked 1,200 kilometres of transect across WA. I think is probably one of the largest terrestrial distance sampling surveys, certainly in Australia, if not beyond. And it resulted in nearly 3,000 detection events of over 3,500 unique possums. And these kinds of data at really fine scales means that we can do amazing things. On the left-hand side for you guys is the transects that were walked and where the possums were detected, and we're able to do some really cool spatial modelling about where the animal's living and why they are, whilst we're correcting for probability of detection. Scotia, which is an animal reserve in South Australia, managed by the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. They set out a bunch of camera traps looking for GPS collared foxes. Some were GPS collared, some weren't. And of course, anyone here that's worked on camera trap data or even tried to take a photo of their child will know how hard it is for them to sit still in front of a camera and actually be able to uniquely identify who they are. So we're often working with these partial images, and we're trying to work out species home ranges and typically abundance estimation actually in density for these types of data. So it's been a lot of fun. We do a bunch of work, writing guidelines for the federal government on bird and bat management plans for wind farms, efficacy testing of technology, fisheries bycatch, detector dogs, population viability models, expert elicitation, trying to help people identify breakpoints in their fisheries data. This is bycatch data of sharks in the Pacific Ocean and why these time series might be changing and when they are. More recently, I've started doing things like data dashboards. It's kind of a nice area now for people to be engaging more with their data hands-on. So these data dashboards are becoming more common, and you want something depressing to work on, it's pretty much fisheries data, but the bycatch of species out in the Pacific Ocean, and even worse is the effect of climate change on our species inside the Pacific Ocean. I actually thought I was pretty climate change literate until I started working out in the Pacific. We have a lot of problems out there. It's not just islands that are coming underwater and issues around human migration and where these people are going to live in 2 or 3 years, but actually range shifting species. And I'm sort of familiar with that on land, but when you're talking about range shifting species in the oceans, people can't feed themselves anymore because these tuna specifically, but other species as well, are moving out of economic zones and people need to manage for this going into the future. So I think this might be the Cook Islands and some climate change modelling about what's going to happen to their stocks over the coming years. Teaching is huge for me. I take it very seriously. I'm going from here over to Perth to run a spatial capture recapture workshop, but we do actually teach a lot. So this is teaching fisheries managers actually from the Pacific R skills. So they're gaining greater empowerment, actually, I find, for them to be able to engage with the data themselves, even though they're collecting it. And, you know, running intro stats courses. This is Daryl McKenzie at DBCA in WA. We run stats courses over there, but actually we're running one next week with Ben Stevenson from Auckland University. So each of these projects is really a different requirement for how I and we work. So some clients are really hands-off, they need independence. Some companies genuinely need to hand over their data to you and say, you're independent, just tell me what you need, and you know, you've got to run with it and provide that advice. Other clients really want to learn, and that's really satisfying from my point of view. And clients really are the best. I've actually made friends with a lot of people that I work with. I tell you what, being a statistician is like the worst job ever. You feel isolated all of the time. You feel stupid all of the time. You feel stressed all of the time. And clients are just incredibly the worst. So isolation, let's talk about this. COVID actually made me feel less isolated. I actually felt like COVID was great for people like me. I worked at home before it was cool. And when COVID came along, it meant that I could really get involved in so much more stuff that was running online. I'm heavily involved in the mentoring. We've touched on it earlier today, and it's been great to meet people, the Stats Society, the biometrics group as well. You know, now everyone is legit working from home. Ironically, I'm now not. I'm out of the house. I got a shipping container, and because I've not been in Hobart, I don't know what the weather's been like, but I assure you sometimes there is crystal clear blue sky. This is not a photoshopped photo. So that's an introvert's dream for an office space, which is now where I work. Stupidity is like me every day. I think this is a true story. These are camera trap photos of a rat. And I don't have a pointer, but you can sort of see the, I called it a scent gland. I didn't know what it was. I'm like, what's wrong with this animal? Is it got a disease? Is it a scent? No, that's a male rat. And, you know, I think that when you're asking people things about their work and their study, they're the experts, right? And you need to be able to speak a common language. I'm asking what feels like dumb questions, but actually our knowledge just sits in different areas of expertise. So I think that sort of opening up to people who are very intimidated about statistics and showing that you don't even know how to ID a male is probably helps them be a little bit more open to you as well. Stress. You know, people talk about consulting being, you know, it's either a drought or a flood. You're worried about where you're going to get your next meal from. I sort of have pretty much always found it to be a flood. There's a lot of work for people with quantitative skills, so I think you guys are set up well for your careers already. Scope creep. I didn't even know what scope creep actually was until someone defined it for me, and it's like basically when clients keep asking for more and more. So that's something that I'm getting better at managing. Personal life. The stresses are too long to list. It's like, oh, I just drew no words. you know, I got really sick with COVID, for example. You know, things happen in people's lives. I moved to, you know, babies, whatever. And I find that I can't actually work with people that don't understand that we're all humans. And just because people are wanting their, you know, their work submitted by Friday, it actually doesn't mean the reality is that you can submit it by Friday. So, you know, that's just life. Data warning triggers, you know, we can't always pick what comes through our email inbox. You know, there was a talk earlier today about domestic violence. Everyone in this room and everyone online, we will all have some sort of trauma in our lives. And so it's sort of awkward when you're sitting in meetings with people and they just nonchalantly throw stuff at you and you're like, oh, and you know, you do need to take 30 seconds to compose yourself. Again, we're all human, but I thought I would float that. Clients, they just, some of them can cause huge amount of stress. And maybe this is relevant to you guys in your professional, like employment settings as well, rather than just those that might go into a future career of consulting. I really like this strategy. I think it's one of the main reasons why I do a lot of teaching, because you put them all in a room and then they need you less going forward. So I think that that's a good skill to have. Alternatively, just try and sack people and not work with them anymore. What I've done previously for genuinely difficult people is I invoice them for my time that I've spent on that project, and it's 100% discount. And I just try and not focus on the money, and I focus on my well-being, and I walk away. That's happened once in 12 years of working with people, so it is rare. I think people look at consulting and are like, oh, you must earn a ton of money. And I assure you, we actually don't. I do invoice everyone the same, but different. And what I mean by that is just a flexible costing model, is what I got told to call it. I really like working with students, and I'll do it for free. I'm generous with my time. I'm generous with clients. If you email me a question, I will absolutely answer you normally in a reasonable time frame. But what I do now is actually tell people the actual dollar value of what I'm giving to you, and then I offer them the discount down from there. Because once you start working with NGOs and you know they're like, hey, go to Jo, she's really cheap, she'll cost $100, and then all of a sudden you're spending weeks and weeks of your time, there can be an element of being taken advantage of. So I always make sure I want to choose who I work pro bono for. I won't do that. This is being recorded. I better not name major oil and gas company names. The best advice I had to do was set up finances at the beginning. So, you know, Xero or MyOb or whatever, make sure you manage this stuff well. I don't know, Stata's outside. Cran, whatever you're using for your software, just make sure you acknowledge people that are writing these packages that we use every day. Analytical Edge donates to CRAN, and you know, next week we're running a spatial capture recapture work in Perth that those of you who know Murray Efford, we actually carve him off a wedge of that money to make sure that these people are getting acknowledgement for the work that we're doing. So I do try and keep that, I believe, quite ethical. This is tricky. I don't work for co-authorship. I have 2 children that eat a lot and they can't eat paper. Not only that, but I had another incident recently with a publication that's on like its 3rd submission. And I sort of think, imagine, you can't even feed your paper to your kid, but you can't even get it published. So, you know, this stuff is always sort of a tension. Onto publications, and you know, maybe dissimilar to a lot of people here, I'm not an academic and I genuinely value this less. I think it does help a lot with professional image, and for young people trying to get jobs, I feel like there's degree escalation. What used to be fine for a master's, now people need a PhD and 2 postdocs. Not only do you need 5 publications, but it's like they need to be in science and nature as well. I find that that's really hard, and I rebut against it as much as possible. Be prepared for outrageous reviewer comments that you are corrupt, pro-industry and falsifying data. I just can't even begin to I just can't understand where reviewers come from when they think that these kinds of comments are, I feel like, a moral reflection on my character. It's quite remarkable how people behave in the reviewing process. And I do apologise to students and, you know, people trying to get publications through from their PhDs and postdocs that end up with what I feel to be pretty unfair reviewers' comments. Having said that, consulting does feel a bit like a dirty word. I do work a lot with government, and when I work with government, I'm then on the receiving end of some of the behaviour of other consultants. And wow, I sort of get why people think that they're all, you know, money hungry and rude. So Analytical Edge, I think, acts very differently to that in that regard. And I was pretty naive when I went into consulting, but actually now I sort of feel like my eyes are wide open with how people behave in this industry, some of the ethics when it comes to providing statistical advice. I'm not someone that rubber stamps work through just to get stuff done, but these consultants do exist. You know, really, I most of the time just want to go and tend my veggie patch. But what actually keeps me here is a lot of things. Teaching, I think, is super important, and, you know, maybe not dissimilar to me, a little bit about how people got exposed to maths, and the positive feedback that people have is, I don't actually know if that's positive. I'm going to try and make it as positive as I can. I think I like statistics now. I remember having stats classes in undergrad that were never given in the context of my field and feeling terrified of it. And, you know, that's sort of me, but it actually, I wasn't ever terrified of statistics. I really just didn't appreciate how cool it could be. And here I am, I think, living pretty much my best life. I almost think this is some sort of PTSD from the academic world. You know, people genuinely find statistics scary. We are all mathematically literate in this room, but we need to remember that there's actually a lot of people out there that aren't, and how we bridge that and communicate with these people will only help your own careers. People will want to work with you if you have good communication skills. I am not an expert in everything, and I don't wear a lot of hats. I often put people in contact with each other, and that's the kind of concept of this talk, is actually being a bridge. And I had a really good experience recently with people I haven't met yet, but over in the Western Australian hub, where I posted on the Stats Consultant Network about needing people to do some collision risk modelling. And the WA folk got in touch, and they're online, and I'll be having meetings with them when I'm in Perth shortly. I think that statistics, I sort of came to this in the early 2000s, and even then we were having this identity crisis of, what is a statistician, and more departments in universities are actually teaching statistics in-house rather than in genuine statistics departments. I don't necessarily actually think that's a very good thing. But, it's like, well, here I am, Joanne Potts. What actually is a statistician? Is it someone with a BSc in an honours in applied statistics? Even then, I felt like a bit of a fraud, and, the imposter syndrome is genuinely real. You get a PhD in statistics and you're like, not sure if I've earned it yet. And then you become an accredited statistician and you're like, oh yeah. And then you start talking to people about these things and really realizing how much you do know, and that all of the people in this room, we have areas of expertise, and it's either in a small area or you might wear many hats, but being quantitative will be fruitful in your life. My final sort of thoughts about the academic system is that people in the room that are, graduating their PhDs onto their postdocs, most of us won't actually become academics. And offering career pathways, if you're called an accidental statistician or a real one, it'll actually benefit everyone. So I really hope that you guys going forward in life really understand that you're in a pretty unique position for quantitative skills, and not staying in academia doesn't mean that there's any sort of failure. I don't think. It's actually, there's this world of research and good quality research that's happening outside of universities. So please remember to keep that in mind. I probably chatted, I'm pretty good on time. Thank you also to the wonderful mentors in life that, have really guided me. This was never genuinely part of my plan to become an accredited statistician, but here we are. It's a lot of fun. It's a great field to work in. So thank you for indulging me in this chat. I helped ask ChatGPT to write me some titles for my talk, and the second one is particularly amusing. Thrilling Odyssey, I don't know.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for a wonderful talk. We do have some time now for some questions. So are there any questions in the room here in Hobart? Yep.
So you mentioned publications in the context of academia and career and so on, but I was just wondering if you have any experience with value that you might have gotten from publications or other kind of sharing of ideas like conferences and so on, for not for the purpose of getting your name out there necessarily, but finding the people with similar ideas and similar research that might you might get a good collaboration out of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's a really good question. And I don't mean to downplay the importance of publications. I think that it's important to get research out. I really do value that and believe it. I've actually had people contact me from publications that then became clients. I read your paper on spatial capture, recapture. We've got these data. Can you help me out as well? So that stuff is definitely valuable. Attending conferences, I think, is loads of fun. And especially in the areas that you might want to work in. So things like medical research, for me, why I'm heading over to Western Australia is because the Australian Wildlife Management Society, AWMS, has got their conference on. And so they were the ones that reached out to us to run workshops. So conferences, absolutely. I also value as well government research. That's something that's really underrated, and there's some really good work happening inside government agencies that I think people need to be made aware of. Government don't often get a lot of opportunity to publish as part of their roles. So we need to keep that in mind.
Great. We have a question on Slack from Daniel, who asks, what does it mean to gain accreditation as a statistician?
Oh, good question. I don't know. You have to apply. Russell did it more recently than me. I can tell you the process. There's a panel. You have to have some higher education inside statistics, and then you present work that is not published. It actually is about working in consulting so that your clients know that you have met a level of standard accepted by the Stats Society and a value judge of the advice that you're going to give as part of that. So I hope that answers that question, actually. Yeah. Oh, the other thing it does, though, is that you do go onto the register on the website, and people can look up stats consultants, and your name and your areas of application are there. So that helps.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, that is the Statistical Society of Australia website that manage the accreditation process. So just while we're waiting to see if there are any questions in Perth or Christchurch, I have a question myself. So you mentioned some of the bad things of consulting around data warning triggers, authorship of payment through co-authorship, and scope creep. Do you have any advice for setting boundaries and expectations with your clients and making sure they are met?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, and that's what I do now. I think that in the early days, I was not assertive enough in managing client expectation because I really wanted to try and keep people happy. But that leads to just a world of pain. And so now it's about trying to keep it real. And that includes my life and, making sure that timeframes are realistic, typically doubled from what I think it's going to be, and making sure that you're in frequent contact, good communication with people. And that's not just clients, that's just collaboration in general. So much of this is applicable across workplaces. People like being told where they're going to stand.
Yeah, we have a question in Hobart.
Hi everyone, this is Cam Patrick yet again. Thanks, Joanne. That was really cool. And so I'm also a statistical consultant and found all of that so relatable. One thing I wanted to ask of someone who has a bit more experience than me: how do you go about estimating time or giving a quote for how much work something is going to be? Because I find myself constantly underestimating that, and I'm wondering if you have sort of a process, because I'm sure you deal with that a lot more than I do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the early days, I made an estimate and then I just doubled it. Now, I think with experience, you get a bit better at it. But the other thing I've done is learn to make time frames for projects contingent on certain aspects of the data. And so data cleaning is just a nightmare. And, I had one project, I do it every year. It's a repeat job, but, every year there's problems, and they found yet more problems this year with the data. And they're like, don't worry, we'll cover your time. And I was sort of like, one, I know you will, but I don't have the time because, my diary is full, and now you've screwed up your data set. And now I've got to find another 3 days of my life to get your work done for you. And that is where it actually puts pressure on now. So I think part of it comes with experience, and then part of it comes with trying to keep contingency in your diary to make sure that when projects go over, it doesn't push out at the other end, other work. Yeah.
Great. We have a question on Slack from regarding the good and the bad aspects of being a statistician and consultant. You really must have a great balancing act going on. So what are some of the general pointers you'd like to give for those of us who are just starting our journeys? Because it really can be lonely and stressful.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that good at balancing it, to be honest. Maybe I'm just really good at pretending. I think that in terms of pointers, one of the reasons why I was sort of reflecting on this talk, and one of the reasons why I didn't really want to go into academia was I take teaching very seriously. I really like it, and I know that it would become quite all-consuming for me. And so I think trying to not have it become all-consuming is really important. So it sounds cliche, but actually leaving your desk, having hobbies, getting outside and balancing this stuff with what's genuinely important in life. During my PhD, I obviously had a baby that was completely unplanned. I used to resent having to leave my desk to pick her up from childcare because I just needed my thesis done. And actually it was a complete blessing because, my counterparts who were spending 11 hours at their desk were not efficient. I tell you what, you give a working mother 5 hours and she can crank out a lot of work. And so I think just making sure that your hours spent at your computer are efficient is the best way to manage that time boundary.
We have another question here in Hobart.
I actually had a similar question as before. I'm just wondering, how do you manage your mental health? You have that flood, you have these kids where they can't eat this pepper, and it just give me idea to quit from being as a lecturer, just working outside an academic, outside the university, just a mental health, it's just like a 24 hours working, never stop.
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. During COVID, it got way worse for me because I'm used to working at home, but I'm not used to working at home with 2 kids and a husband. And so that stuff, and I am deeply aware that I say that, acknowledging that Tasmania really escaped the worst of COVID. So I acknowledge people in Melbourne were far worse off. But that became hard, and especially having a room in the house that, sure, you can shut the door on, but I actually felt this dark energy just radiating out of the door. Now I've got the office pod, and so it's literally a converted shipping container. It's nothing fancy, but moving my books and my computer out of the house made me feel so light. So now I can walk, even if it's 50 meters, past the chicken coop, throw chicken feed in, and then, walk off to work. It's a huge thing for me. That distinction is a big deal. I have been recommended, and I'm terrible at maintaining practice, but having some sort of yoga stretches to finish your day and then shut the door and walk out was something I did do during COVID, but that stuff falls by the wayside.
Great. I think we might have time for one last question, and I'll go to Daisy, who's posted on the Slack. Thanks, Joe, for the really engaging talk. I wonder how you handle working with people who are experts in their field and incredibly intelligent, impressive people, but may have limited to no understanding of statistics. How do you convince them to trust you know what you're talking about from the stats side? That's one of the hardest parts of working in statistics for me.
Yeah, these are really good questions. I used to find a lot of people really intimidating to work with because, they've published amazing things and done amazing things with their life. And then, I come along and I all I know is statistics, but they're experts in their field. I find that's probably changed a little bit with age and, growing up, that I'm still doing. One thing that I would say back to that, though, is that the worst clients are the ones that don't listen to you. The worst collaborators are the ones that don't listen to you. If people aren't willing to have a conversation that is two-way, I find that balance in power is something that I very difficult, disengaging, and actually uninspiring to work in. I'd probably manage my way out of it now. That's harder for early career statisticians, and yeah, I acknowledge it's really hard.